Hello and welcome to Sass Bites. This is your weekly bite of Sass during your lunch break. I am your host, Micah Godbolt, and we are continuing down the road towards SassConf. This is episode 4 in the series where we're going to go through and speak with, hopefully, all of the speakers that are going to be at SassConf this year. Get a chance to sit down with them, talk to them about their background, their history in Sass, and as well as about their talks, what inspired their talks, and to give you a quick glimpse into what to expect when you show up in Austin in November. And speaking of Austin in November, certainly do want to remind you that SassConf is going to be November 11th through 14th in Austin, Texas. And it is currently $500 for the tickets, though I've heard maybe a rumor of a sale this weekend. So keep an eye out on the SassConf. I don't want to say yes or no on that until they actually pull the trigger. So thanks for checking out this episode. One other bit of news I want to give you is that Responsive Field Day is coming up in a little bit. That's a Portland conference. It's the first year actually for this conference, but they pulled out all the stops for this show. It's a one-day conference from 9 to 6 on Friday, September 25th. You're going to have people like Brad Frost, Ethan Marcotte, Jen Simmons, Valahead, and all for $175. So if you're in the area, this is a must-see. I know I'm going to be there as well. I definitely recommend, if you can make it to Portland or in Portland, to check that one out. You can also check out CSS DevConf, which is coming up at the end of October. I just found out that I need to rewrite half my talk, which is exciting. So that should be a whole lot of fun. We'll see if I can pull it off. It is going to be October 26th through 28th, and it's down in Long Beach, California on the Queen Mary. So we're actually going to be having the conference on a boat. I think that's probably one of the first, at least I know for me. So moving on to our discussion today, we've got two great guests. We've got Bernard Yu, who is a content strategist and information architect by trade, a philosopher and political theory nerd by training, and a social justice wizard and lover of style guides by all heart, vocation, and necessity. Style guides are a great thing. Is also a maker of Internet-y things out in the DC area. And so, hello, Bernard, and thanks for coming on the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Awesome. And then next to him, we've got Dan. Dan now is a software engineer on the front-end infrastructure team at Etsy. So, a company with some really, really cool background. He loves tackling the growing complexities of front-end engineering, learning and teaching in a collaborative environment, and solving both technical and people problems of producing software. Also a big fan of the NBA, which is always fun when you're out in the New York area, that's right. Drinking lots of soy lattes, exploring the boroughs out there with his wife. So Dan, thanks for coming on the show today as well.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. Well, let's dive into the discussion, dive into this interview real quick. And Bernard, you're going to be up first. First thing we'd really love to ask our guests, especially new ones to the show, is how did you get into Sass? And are you into Sass? We've actually had some less users on the show. It's kind of crazy. But what's your history with Sass? What brought you to this point?
So in 2009, I was consulting, and I had a little bit of downtime, and I really wanted to rebuild my toolkit for mobile-first design, and I really wanted to build like a proper pattern library, and Sass mixins really let me like keep everything nice and semantic while also having code that I only had to use once. So yeah. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, with style guides especially, because you're trying to make a system and be able to apply Sass to your system in a way, especially that's not having to use really horrible class names and keep things semantic and those kind of things. It's
exactly.
Cool, and then you just kind of fell in love with Sass at that point, and you've been pretty much using it ever since?
Yep. I need to retool myself again, but still using Sass.
What's going to be the next tooling that you dive into?
I'm really not sure. I really want to use Sass maps properly, so I can, once I have a library, I can go to a project and go, all right, here are the client's colors, put that all into a Sass map, and bam, I'm done.
Yes, yeah. That is definitely a sweet way to do it. Be able to have that big, huge kind of config set of variables that you can just set once, have a bunch of defaults, and just blast through it super fast. Nice.
Totally.
Cool. So outside of your regular work, what else are you involved in? Anything that you want to tell people about?
So I nerd out about cooking a lot. Like I like to think of cooking as a modular process, going back to pattern libraries. Pattern libraries seem to be everywhere in my life. Instead of like thinking of them as one-off recipes, so like dumplings, you have your skin, your filling, your sauce, your cooking method, and each of those are different modules that you can use a blue Lego or a green Lego. And
there's a lot of mixing involved, so you're back to the mixings.
Exactly. And then aside from that, I have a lot of like random web projects that for like book publishing that almost never see the light of day, but I like them anyway.
It keeps you busy, right?
Yes.
So what's your philosophy background? You just like waxing philosophically, or do you have some training or education in it?
I did philosophy and poli-sci for undergrad, so I did a lot of Wittgenstein doing philosophy of language, philosophy of mind, and that somehow fed into loving style guides. I'm not questioning it.
Just go with it. It seems like a natural progression to me. So, so at SassConf this year, you're going to be giving a really interesting talk. Something that I know I've never heard someone even approach this topic, because it doesn't sound like the most enjoyable topic to have to deal with. But if you do any type of freelancing, this is definitely something you're going to run into, and even in other types of work. The question is, how do you decide when to end a project ethically? Now, can you talk a little bit about what brought you to wanting to talk about this?
Yeah. So in 2008, 2009, well, I mostly work with nonprofits, and 2008, 2009, the economic collapse hit nonprofits really hard, and a lot of my clients were friends first and then clients second, but because of budget issues, I lost a lot of clients, and in a couple of those, I lost a lot of friends. So nowadays, I try to think about like when I'm starting up a new project, immediately thinking about at what point do we safely say this isn't working. So the project may fail, but the friendships don't, because if I'm working on something, like the people I'm working with basically become my friends, and I prefer to keep those friendships than having a bad project. So
exactly. So it's basically how to end a project without burning all of your bridges. It's
exactly.
Kind of maybe another subtitle there.
Yep.
That sounds really good. Do you have any any type of story that you might be able to use to illustrate like what you're talking about here?
There was one client who was waiting for 9 months on a government grant, and like I was holding off all of my other projects and my entire pipeline open because it was supposed to be a huge project, and it got to the point where like I was doing a lot of pro bono work for them, which was probably a bad idea, but to the point where I'm like, I have to stop, and you're not paying me, so lost a friendship there, and lost a amazing project that I wish could have continued, but it happens.
Exactly. And if you knew what you know now, is there something that you would have done differently in that process to maybe not have it go past that, burning that bridge, that point?
I would have started when I would have written the contract differently, and then the second is like every time we're checking in, saying really clearly saying that, all right, if this continues to go on hold, I'm going to have to take up other projects, and you're going to have to wait another 6 months until my pipeline opens up. And if that works, then that works. If that doesn't, then I'll find you someone else to work with. But yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, just kind of being open and honest about the fact that this could end if no funds come in. Just to be realistic about it sometimes.
Totally.
Certainly looking forward to. Is it going to be? It's a full 45-minute talk then?
It's going to be not a workshop, but one of the roundtable discussions.
Roundtables. That's right. Very nice. So are you going to be working with a few other people to discuss, or just kind of discussing with the room?
Discussing with the room.
Great. So bring your stories, bring your horror stories, bring your war stories. Hopefully, bring some of your good stories. And it sounds like it'll be a really cool roundtable to be part of.
Yep.
Great. Thank you, Bernard. So let's move over to Dan, and let's talk to Dan. How did you get into Sass? What's your story of coming into the language?
Cool. So I think I first encountered Sass in 2012. I was a front-end developer. I just moved to a front-end development job at an agency in the DC area, and the project that I was placed on at the time, they were deciding between Sass and less, and then they decided to go with Sass. And this was back in the day. I think this was like when the default Sass syntax was like the Python style white space delimited syntax. And I think I echo everyone's sentiments who talks about like their first encounter with Sass and that it was a game changer. It was kind of like a revelation, adding programming constructs to CSS, variables, functions, mixins, nesting. It was kind of like CSS, the good parts for me.
Now, did you come from more of a programming background, or what was your background before that?
Yeah, I mean, I had been working at a government contractor in the area as a full stack developer for a couple of years, but then I decided to go to an agency and focus a little bit more on front end work. Gotcha.
So it was kind of a nice comfort to be able to come in and see, oh wow, I can continue to use some of these constructs and abstracts and be able to organize code and abstract away all those wet parts and get them drier.
Totally.
It's always fun to see how, especially in front-end development, people come from so many different, whether it's philosophy and political science or background or programming languages. When they come to front-end development, they're able to bring in kind of their own backgrounds and their own expertises, and it's really kind of neat to see how each of those play out. So, so you're in New York City, correct? So, what else do you do or like to do outside of your job? What are the things you're involved in?
So one thing I do, I'm a leukemia survivor, and so one thing I do is since 2011 I've been volunteering with Be the Match. Be the Match is the national organization that helps run the bone marrow registry. Bone marrow donation is it's a thing that's typically needed for blood cancer patients or people with autoimmune diseases, and they have a particular problem because if you're an ethnic minority who needs a bone marrow donation, you're in a particularly tough spot because you likely need someone of the same ethnicity. And so what I do is I'll go to these events, I'll volunteer, I'll share my story, which I think is pretty valuable because I do come from a minority background, and what I found is that it's less of a lack of empathy thing in the minority community in terms of why people aren't donors. It's more just a lack of information. And so I created a website in 2012, cheekswab.org, and I ran that throughout Northern Virginia and the DC area. But now that it's 2015, my New Year's resolution for this year was to revamp that in New York City. Outside of that, these are kind of fighting words, but I'm pretty confident that New York City is the best food city in the world. So my wife and I like to explore the boroughs. You can spin a globe and touch a country and eat that meal that day, which is awesome.
That's pretty amazing.
I also nerd out about cooking, maybe more than I nerd out about programming. I have a cooking blog, so that's a thing. And then I also play basketball. I play on the company team. We're called Brooklyn Netsy, which is just one of the 1,000 Etsy puns you'll find throughout our office.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like you keep yourself pretty busy, and I guess really the most important question is, where's the best New York pizza?
Wow. Okay, you're gonna go with a heavy-hitting question. I contend that the best individual slice of New York pizza is at Prince Street Pizza in Soho. It's $5, but and you have to get the Sicilian, and you have to get it with pepperoni, but that thing will change your life.
Awesome. I know the last couple of years, SassConf has actually been out in New York, so I remember asking lots of questions about best food spots in inside of New York. So a year late, but definitely still very useful for the next time I stop by New York. So and actually, jumping over there, actually no, before we do that, I'll give you a chance to talk about your talk, especially coming from Etsy. I've read the description of your talk. It should be really exciting. I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. But you're talking about converting to scale with Sass. Can you talk a little bit about what this is going to be about, some inspirations for it?
Yeah, totally. So I'm also very excited for this talk. So I think like the idea of integrating Sass at Etsy far predates my employment at Etsy. I've been at Etsy for about 2 years, but I think it kind of always boiled down to the same question. It was like, is it worth the risk? You know, Etsy's been around for over 10 years. There have been hundreds of developers that have come through our doors, millions of lines of code, and introducing a change to touch all of our front-end code in one fell swoop is a super risky proposition. And like you sort of balance, is it worth the productivity boons of having Sass to have the potential downside risk of breaking the site in all these kind of crazy ways? And we have so many different combinations of the way you can view the site that it's kind of impossible to like visually regression test every single page on the site. So it was doable, but it was kind of like nobody had the bandwidth to explore like the edge cases and make sure that, you know, in a concrete way things wouldn't break. Fortunately, around 18 months ago, we formed a new team, the front-end infrastructure team, which is a team I currently sit on. And our job is to see how we can make our lives better for both the developers and the designers at Etsy. And so Sass again was once again brought to the table, and we evaluated it as a team that's like intended to focus on problems of this type of scale on the front end. And so we did a lot of things, and it was just like a really exciting project to work on. And I mean, I worked at an agency, and I have a lot of individual projects where I'll use Sass from the get-go, and I think that's pretty straightforward. There's a lot of good documentation, but I think introducing Sass on an existing monolithic code base is like somewhat of a different challenge, and how to do that sanely and responsibly. I wrote a blog post that was featured on our tech blog, Codiscraft, earlier this year, and that got a lot of traction from companies who are facing a similar problem. And so I think like sharing those learnings is a really good opportunity. And there's like a little bit of ops work. There's some integration with designers. We talk about like how we put some things in our development workflows to make our Sass maintainable moving forward. And so yeah, it's just I'm excited to share. I think the blog post is really cool, but like being able to present it in front of people would be even cooler. I also got to push a 1 million line change to GitHub, which is like kind of insane, right? Like, I don't think I'll ever top that in my career. And so it's just like that's like the cherry on top. Not that that means anything, a 1 million line change. It's just like it's an interesting story that backs a 1 million. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, so basically the discussion of how do you eat an elephant with a spoon, answer being, you know, one bite at a time. So I'm really interested actually in front-end infrastructure as a team in a company the size of Etsy. So you spend a lot of time like building tooling and building processes. Is that kind of the focus of that?
We do a lot of things. We kind of like so our designers code, and so we talk to them. We talk about like implementing style guides. We talk about, you know, what can we do to make it so that like the line between the designers and the developers are less, what's the word, like siloed, and like how we can like have development constructs in place that make everyone's lives easier. We handle the asset pipeline, so that's like compiling Sass in this case, or JavaScript or whatever. And we also tightly coupled to the performance team. And so that's just like making sure performance across the site, including front-end performance, is like snappy.
Nice, cool. Yeah, it's really neat to see it when you get to organizations of that size, how people start to break off into different types of groups and specialties and focuses. So very, very cool. We need to hear a lot more about that. So thanks to both of you for coming on the show today. It's been a really cool show, and I think both of you have really neat stories, and it'll be fun to see those stories come out in your talks in November. Now, the last question being that everyone's going to be out in Austin in November. For one, is the weather like at all good in November? I know the year and a half ago, DrupalCon was out there like at the end of May or something, and apparently it was just horrendous to be in Austin that month. Either of you been out to Austin before?
I haven't.
I was at Austin last year for my bachelor party, so yes.
Dude, what time of the year was that?
I think it was July. It was insanely hot.
So anything less insane than July and May is probably a good thing. Now you are the food buff, so when everyone shows up in Austin, Dan, where should they go eat, and what should they go order, if you have even that specific?
So the menu of my bachelor party was primarily meat-based, and I mean, like Austin, it's the best. So, okay, I think there are two really popular barbecue destinations in Austin. One of them is Salt Lick Barbecue, which is like a little bit farther out, and it has this like iconic pit of this fire pit where all this meat's cooking on top. It's been featured on Food Network, and until when I ate at Salt Lick, I was like, wow, this is the best barbecue I've ever had in my life. And then the next morning, we went to Franklin's, which is in Austin proper. My groomsmen got in line at 7:30 a.m. for an 11:30 a.m. opening. And after eating Franklin's the next day, after eating Salt Lake the day before, Franklin's was then the best barbecue I've ever had in my life. So it's like, generally speaking, I don't think you can really go wrong. And then like the food truck scene is incredible too, and so.
So pretty much eat everything. So like a week before, just fast. Like come skinny and hungry and ready to eat.
Bring some multivitamins.
There we go. Well, thanks both of you for coming on the show today. Look forward to hearing more about your talks and hearing your talks. And best of luck to you at SassConf. And I'm sure we'll see you around.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you again next week for more of our Road to SassConf. Catch y'all later.